You've been here before.
Not here exactly.
Not in this exact moment. But you know this feeling. You're sitting across from someone who seems wonderful on paper. They're kind. They're interesting. They laugh at the right moments. And somewhere in the back of your mind, very quietly, you're asking yourself the same question you've asked a dozen times before. Is this real? Or am I doing it again? That question. That specific, exhausting, quietly terrifying question. That's why you're here today. Because you've done the work. You've read the books, maybe seen a therapist, definitely had the long conversations with your closest friends at 10 o'clock at night, trying to figure out what went wrong and what you actually want now. And still, when you're sitting across from someone new, you don't quite trust yourself. You don't fully trust what you feel. You don't know if what you're experiencing is genuine connection or just the old familiar pull towards something that's going to hurt you again eventually. And here's what nobody tells you about dating after divorce, after 40, after the kind of loss that reshapes you from the inside out. The problem usually isn't that you can't find people. The problem is that you can't read them fast enough. You meet someone, you feel something. And before you've had time to actually assess whether this person fits your life now, not your life at 32, not the life you hoped you'd have, but the actual life you're living right now, you're already emotionally invested. You're already rearranging things in your mind. You're already hoping. And hope for people at this stage of life is both a gift and a liability. Because you know exactly how much time hope can cost you when it's placed in the wrong person. So that's what this is about. Not chemistry. Not checklists. Not the kind of compatibility quiz that tells you whether you both like hiking and Italian food. What I'm going to give you today are 4 filters. Specific, real, immediately usable filters that you can apply in the first few dates, sometimes in the first few conversations, that will tell you with remarkable clarity whether the person sitting across from you is genuinely right for your life at this stage. Not perfect, not a fantasy, but actually genuinely compatible with who you are now and where you're going. By the end of this, you'll have a framework that cuts through the noise, quiets the anxiety, and gives you something solid to stand on when your feelings are pulling you in a direction you're not sure you should follow. I want to tell you something before we get into this. A few years ago, I was speaking with a woman, I'll call her Claire, who was 51 years old, 2 years out of a 23-year marriage, and completely frozen. Not because she didn't want to date. She did, desperately, in the most human way possible. But every time she met someone who seemed promising, she'd either dismiss them almost immediately, convince something must be wrong with them if they were interested in her, or she'd fall too fast, too deep, attach herself to the potential she saw rather than the reality in front of her, and then 6 months later she'd be devastated again, wondering how she missed the signs. She wasn't broken. She wasn't bad at relationships. She was operating without a filter. She was walking into every new connection relying entirely on feelings that had been trained by a marriage that didn't ultimately work, feelings that, through no fault of her own, had learned some very unhelpful patterns about what love is supposed to feel like. What Claire needed wasn't more dating experience. She needed a framework, a way to slow down the evaluation process just enough to let her wisdom catch up with her heart. That's what these 4 filters are. Now, before we get to them, I want to say something directly to you. Something I mean completely seriously. The reason standard dating advice fails people at this stage of life, and it does fail consistently, almost systematically, is that it's built on assumptions that don't apply to you anymore. It assumes you have unlimited time to date casually and figure it out as you go. It assumes your emotional wiring is still fresh and uncommitted. It assumes that attraction alone is a reasonable starting point for building something real. And it assumes that the main thing standing between you and a great relationship is just meeting the right person. None of that is true for you. You have a life, a full, complex, layered life with history in it. You have children, perhaps, or commitments, or a career that matters to you, or friendships you've fought to keep, or a version of yourself that you've worked incredibly hard to rebuild after everything fell apart. You don't have 5 years to casually date someone and discover they fundamentally can't show up for you. You can't afford to invest 18 months in something that has a structural problem that was visible on the 3rd date if you'd known what to look for. The filters I'm about to give you are designed specifically for that reality. They are not about being picky. They are not about fear. They are about being intelligent with something as precious and finite as your time and your emotional energy. The first filter is what I call the consistency filter. And I want you to really hear this one because it's the one that almost everyone in this life stage either skips or misapplies. Consistency is not about whether someone texts you back quickly. It's not about grand gestures or how intensely they pursue you in the beginning. In fact, and this is crucial, the intensity of someone's pursuit in the early stages is one of the least reliable indicators of who they actually are. You've probably already learned this. The person who called every day and made you feel like the center of the universe for the first 6 weeks and then slowly, quietly became someone different. That's not consistency. That's performance followed by exhaustion. Real consistency, the kind that actually tells you something meaningful, is the alignment between what someone says and what they do, measured over time. Not over days, over weeks, over multiple different contexts and circumstances. Do they say they'll call on Tuesday and then call on Tuesday? Not because punctuality is everything, but because that small act, repeated, tells you something about whether their words and their actions come from the same place. Do they show up the same way when they're stressed or tired, or when the initial excitement has faded to something quieter and more sustainable? Because that quieter version, that's actually who they are. The exciting version at the beginning is who they want you to see. The psychological root of why this filter matters so much after 40 is this. After a long marriage or a significant long-term relationship, your nervous system has been deeply trained by whatever consistency or inconsistency existed in that relationship. If you were with someone who was emotionally unpredictable, warm one week, distant the next, loving in public and critical in private, your system learned to live in that uncertainty. And here's the painful part. That uncertainty might actually feel like excitement to you now. The inconsistent person might feel more interesting, more alive, more magnetic than someone who is steady and shows up the same way every time. Because steady feels boring to a nervous system that was wired for chaos. This is not a character flaw in you. This is neurological. This is what long exposure to inconsistency does to a person's baseline. But knowing that it's neurological doesn't mean you can ignore it. It means you have to apply the filter consciously rather than relying on how someone makes you feel. So here's the practical step for this week. Think about someone you're currently seeing or someone you've recently seen. Make a short, honest list of 3 things they said they would do and whether they did those things. Not big dramatic promises. Small ones. Did they remember something you told them and follow up on it? Did they make a plan and follow through on it without you prompting them? Did their behavior the 4th time you met feel fundamentally similar to their behavior the first time? Consistency is in the small moments. And small moments compounded over time are what relationships are actually built from. Every year you spend with someone whose inconsistency you've normalized, excused, or romanticized is a year of your emotional energy going into a foundation that cannot hold. That's the cost. And you already know it because you've paid it before. The second filter is the emotional availability filter. And this one is more nuanced than it sounds, so stay with me. Emotional availability is not about whether someone is expressive. It is not about whether they cry at movies or tell you about their feelings on the second date. Emotional availability, in the way that actually matters for building something real, is about whether someone has the capacity to be present with your emotional world without shutting down, deflecting, or making it about themselves. Here's the scenario you'll recognize. You share something vulnerable, something real, a fear, a sadness, a moment of uncertainty about your life. And the person you're with either immediately offers a solution as if the problem needs to be fixed rather than heard, or they get uncomfortable and change the subject, or they respond by sharing something about themselves that somehow becomes the focus of the conversation. Or, and this is the subtlest version, they do respond with what sounds like empathy, but something about it feels slightly off, slightly rehearsed, like they're performing care rather than actually feeling it. None of those responses mean someone is a bad person, but they are meaningful data. Because what you need at this stage of your life is someone who can sit with emotional complexity. Your life has complexity in it. You have a past. You have children who have feelings. You have grief that surfaces sometimes when you least expect it. You have moments of deep uncertainty and moments of real joy that you want to share with someone who can actually meet you there. The psychological root of emotional unavailability in people over 40 is almost always one of three things. They haven't processed their own grief from their previous relationship. They were raised in a family where emotions were managed through distance or humor or control. Or they've been alone long enough that they've unconsciously built a life where emotional intensity doesn't really have a place, and they don't yet know how to let someone back in. None of those are disqualifying on their own, but they matter. They matter enormously. And they won't fix themselves just because you love someone well enough. I want to stop here for a moment, because I know that what I'm describing isn't light. I know that sitting with these filters and honestly applying them to someone you actually like, someone you might already have feelings for, is genuinely hard work. It requires you to hold two things at once: the warmth of what you feel and the clarity of what you see. And that's not easy. That tension is real and it deserves to be acknowledged. But here's the other side of that. The clarity, when you develop it, is one of the most freeing things you will ever experience in dating. Because it means you're no longer at the mercy of your feelings alone. You have something solid to stand on. And the next filter is one of the most powerful ones of all. The third filter is what I call the life architecture filter. And this is the one that people at this stage most frequently skip because it feels too practical, too unromantic. But I promise you it is not. In fact, applied correctly, this filter is one of the most genuinely intimate things you can explore with another person. Life architecture is the shape of someone's actual daily life, their commitments, their priorities, their relationship with their children if they have them, their relationship with their time, their financial philosophy, their proximity, their plans for the next decade. Not their dreams in the abstract, their actual current choices. Here's why this matters so urgently after 40. When you were younger, you and a partner could build your life architecture together because neither of you had much of one yet. You were both relatively portable. You could negotiate where to live, how to spend weekends, what family looked like, what ambition looked like. The structure was still being built, and you built it together. At 45 or 52, that's no longer true. You have a life, a real one, with architecture that is already largely in place. Children in specific schools in a specific city, a career that requires specific things from your time and energy, a financial situation that has real parameters, a social world that matters to you, a lifestyle you've built deliberately or stumbled into and now genuinely value. And the person across from you, they have one too, completely independent of yours, built without you in mind. The question the life architecture filter asks is not whether you both want love. Of course you both want love. The question is whether your actual lives, as they currently exist, have enough structural compatibility to give a relationship real space to grow. Because love in the abstract is not enough. Love needs to live somewhere. It needs to fit into schedules and school pickups and holidays and cities and the daily rhythms of two real, already built lives. The cost of ignoring this filter is something I've seen again and again, and it is one of the most heartbreaking forms of loss in later life dating. Two people who genuinely love each other, who have real chemistry and deep emotional connection, and whose lives simply cannot bend enough to hold what they have together. Not because anyone did anything wrong, but because nobody asked the structural questions soon enough. Because the romance was real, and the architecture was incompatible, and neither person wanted to look at that until they were deeply invested, and the answer was devastating. Don't let that be your story. The practical step here is this. Sometime in the first month, not the first date, but not 6 months in either, have what I call the life map conversation. Not as an interrogation, as genuine curiosity about another person's world. Ask where they see themselves living in 5 years. Ask how their relationship with their kids works and what it requires of their time. Ask what their weekends actually look like when nothing is planned. Listen not just to the answers, but to how they talk about their commitments, with resentment or with ownership, with flexibility or with rigidity. The answers will tell you whether your architectures can coexist, complement each other, or whether they're fundamentally pulling in opposite directions. And now the fourth filter, the one I want you to sit with the longest, the one that operates not at the level of behavior or logistics or even emotional skill, but at the level of identity. Who you actually are, who they actually are, and whether those two people at the deepest level are pointing in the same direction. I call this the values velocity filter. And I want to explain exactly what I mean by that phrase because both words matter. Values are not your opinions about politics or your preferences about how a kitchen should be organized. Values, in the sense I mean them here, are the things that your behavior consistently protects, even when it costs you something. They are the non-negotiables that show up not in what you say about yourself, but in the choices you make when things are hard. The person who says family is their top priority but consistently chooses work when there's a conflict, their actual value is achievement. The person who says they want a partner but pulls away every time emotional intimacy deepens, their actual value right now is self-protection. Not because they're dishonest, because values can be things we're still becoming, not things we've already arrived at. Velocity is the direction and speed at which someone is growing. Are they moving toward more openness, more self-awareness, more capacity for intimacy? Or are they moving toward more contraction, more self-protection, more certainty that the world is disappointing and people can't be trusted? Here is the deepest truth I can offer you about dating at this stage of life. You are not looking for someone who is already perfectly healed. None of us are. You are looking for someone whose values, underneath all the protective layers and the dating anxiety and the slightly rusty social skills, are genuinely aligned with yours. And you are looking for someone whose velocity, the direction they are moving in their own growth and healing, is compatible with yours. Not identical. Compatible? Because if your values are genuinely aligned and you are both moving, however imperfectly, in the direction of more openness and more capacity for love, then almost everything else, the awkward first months, the difficult conversations, the logistics of two complex lives trying to find each other, becomes navigable. It becomes something you work through together because you are, at the core, going the same direction. But if your values are misaligned, no amount of chemistry will bridge that gap long term. And if one of you is moving toward openness while the other is quietly, maybe unconsciously, contracting back into safety, that gap will grow. Slowly, invisibly, and then undeniably. Here's what I want you to notice this week with someone you're seeing. Don't ask them what their values are. Nobody knows how to answer that question honestly on a date. Instead, watch what they protect. Watch what they prioritize when there are competing demands on their time. Watch how they talk about people who have hurt them with permanent bitterness or with something closer to understanding, even if it costs them something to get there. Watch whether they are curious about your inner world or primarily interested in presenting their own. Watch whether they take responsibility for their part in things that didn't work out, or whether the story they tell always has them as the one who didn't deserve what happened. Those aren't flaws to judge. They are data points. They are velocity indicators. And they will tell you, if you're willing to look, whether this person is on a path that could eventually meet yours. Now let me bring all four of these together, because they're not separate tests. They're one integrated way of seeing. The consistency filter tells you whether someone's inner world and outer behavior are the same, whether who they present to you is who they actually are when it costs them something to show up. The emotional availability filter tells you whether someone has enough access to their own interior life to actually be present with yours, whether they can hold the complexity of real intimacy without retreating. The life architecture filter tells you whether the practical shape of two lives has enough structural compatibility to give love a real home, because love needs to live somewhere, and somewhere has to actually exist. And the values velocity filter tells you something deeper than any of the others. It tells you not just who someone is today, but who they are becoming, and whether that direction is one you can walk beside. These four filters, applied honestly and with compassion, and not as a way to eliminate people, but as a way to genuinely see them, will,